cool. Well, I see we have a couple students joining us today, so thanks so much for joining us and welcome to our AI machine learning office hours. It's February 6th. My name is Molly and I'm a student advisor for the course, and I'm here with Dan, who is also our office hour host and mentor. And then Dan, do you want to introduce our special guest today?
Yeah, I'm really excited to have Jake Tutmeyer here to talk with us. Jake and I worked together at Booz Allen earlier in my career, and Jake's now a applied scientist doing some cool machine learning stuff at Amazon. So I reached out to Jake because I was like, man, if I wanted to bring in somebody who I thought had cutting edge experience and what it looks like at a company that's well known for doing that. I mean, it's hard to pick somebody better. So Jake,
well, what Dan means to say is he reached out to that guy. That guy said no. And then he reached out to me. And,
oh, man. Yeah, it's good to catch up, dude. It's been too long.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So,
well, thanks so much, Jacob, for joining us. Yeah, we do really appreciate it. We can kind of, and students feel free to jump in with questions. I know Dan and I do have kind of a list, and it can be definitely an organic conversation. But if you guys have any questions while we're talking, feel free to join in. Love to unmute yourselves, join us on camera, or add questions to the chat box down below to your right, and we can definitely get those questions answered for you. So sorry, quick jump in there, but feel free, guys, to take it away. Dan, I know I slacked you the questions earlier. Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jake, I think something that like everybody's always interested in is how did you get to where you're at? Because we know that machine learning jobs in general can be very competitive, and certainly Amazon jobs are probably more competitive than most. So, what's your background?
Yeah, I think with a lot of these types of stories, it's a combination of it being in the right place at the right time. So there's certainly a component of luck that goes along with it. And then a component of being kind of working hard and, sorry, I have some background noise. That's right. I also have a toddler, so it has taught me a lot of patience along the way, which is great.
That's your hot tip for all AI machine learning engineers. Just get a kid and work on your patience.
That's the secret. No, so I think too, it was just sort of a lot of hard work that I sort of started early. So I got into machine learning early in my graduate school career. So I started grad school back in 2013. And that's when I really started it. Before that, I had actually started in industry, my career as an engineer. And I'd done some sort of economic forecast and things like that, but very minimal, kind of really bare bones state space modeling and things like that. Nothing that was too rigorous. And then once I kind of entered graduate school, machine learning started to be this new hot thing that everyone was just super interested in and wanted to try to do it. And so, I think naturally my advisor was looking to kind of start up some projects on that. And I was one of the few people that actually had a coding background at the time with him. And so he was like, hey, you have a coding background. Why don't you try doing this? And so we sort of jumped in, and I really fell in love with it early on.
Grad school for computer science or grad school for mathematics, or I think it's physics?
Yeah, so I was doing graduate school in computational physics at Johns Hopkins. And my advisor, he was actually a chemist, but we collaborated with a computer science professor in machine learning for a lot of it. And so it was applying machine learning to the material science field. And I really got into it there. And as I started to do more, I ultimately ended up, contributing to a few papers while in graduate school. But it sort of hit a point where I sort of realized oh man, this data science thing, it's really starting to become a thing, right? There's a lot of jobs. I can see there's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of interest in it. And so a friend of mine was like, hey man, he worked at Booz Allen at the time. And he was like, hey man, Booz Allen is looking to hire a lot of data scientists this year. You have what could be a really good background for an entry-level position we're looking at. Why don't you apply? And so I was like, well, it can't hurt to go on the interview, right? And so, went on the interview. That went well. And then, eventually they came back with an offer. And I was like, well, can't hurt to see what the offer is. And then it really started to strike me that I knew at the time that I really wanted to go into, that was really where I saw my future. And so it really came down to just the fact that, I can continue working on my PhD, or I could kind of go into industry. And since I knew that was the end goal anyway, I sort of jumped at the opportunity and sort of segued out of my PhD program, kind of in the midst of my dissertation, and went into industry. And I think it was a good decision so far. Looking back, I think it's definitely something that has only helped me.
Yeah.
I think being in industry, so since I made the switch, it's really helped me build out and become a little bit more well-rounded. It was funny when I was in graduate school, right? Like we were still like SCPing jars over to like a 10-year-old server,
Yeah.
and like running those manually, and that was like state of the art. It was like, oh man, I'm deploying the jar.
Yeah.
Like now it's laughable when I about the tools that we use at Amazon, even the tools we use at Booz Allen to do these types of automated build pipelines and to really set up this code and do these things. It was laughable.
Yeah.
How far behind, certain group, not all groups, but certain groups in academia are and still are. And I think that was also a motivator, is I could also see the writing on the wall, at least right now, where I felt like in machine learning, there was so much amazing work being done in industry. I remember applying to a fellowship through Google when I was in graduate school. And the advisor we were collaborating with in computer science, he was like, you need to get this straight right now. The guys at Google reviewing your application know more about machine learning than we ever will. And he was a tenured professor in machine learning at Johns Hopkins. And he was like, these guys know so much about it. And he was right. I mean, if you look at the things they've done and how groundbreaking a lot of their work has been, it was really motivating for me to say, look, like there's a lot of really cool things going on in industry.
Yeah.
And I think, this is not a field where the only if you want to work on interesting problems, you kind of have to stay in academia. You can.
So I have a question for you then, kind of tagging on to that. So we both participated in the hiring process at Booz Allen for people that we're working on. It was kind of a combination of data science and sort of AI sort of project. And then I assume you probably continued that process or continued to be involved in hiring at Amazon. What are some of the things that you look for when you look for a candidate to be in, a data engineering, or more accurately, a machine learning engineering, or a data scientist that supports the development of models that are going to be put into production? What are the things you look for in a resume, in the interview? Like, can you talk at all about that?
Yeah, sure. So, and again, it varies depending on the person, but I think in general, this is something that like really everyone kind of agrees on. So I like the fact that you spelled out it's incredibly true. So, and it's something to be important for anyone searching for a job in data science. Make sure you understand the parameters of that job really, really well, because, and ask questions about it in the interview. Ask them like, what does my day-to-day look like? What types of problems, will I be solving? And people should be able to give you vague ideas. I mean, they can't, until you're hired and onboarded, they can't give you all the gory details in it, but they should be able to provide you with good justification and clear idea of what you'll be doing. And if they can't, then that's a sign, and usually a bad sign. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely interviewed for jobs that were really more of like a data analyst position. And they labeled it as data science, right? And sometimes they do that as sort of a play to get more talented applicants applying to their jobs and stuff. Or I've interviewed for jobs that were really more of like a database admin, and it was like data engineering role or something, right?
Yeah.
And so definitely be mindful of the fact that people slap this label spectrum of jobs. And it's really up to you to make sure you're educated about what the parameters of that job are, and to make sure it fits with what you really want out of a data science position, because they can be very broad.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so quickly ask Jake, like what are some of the red flags to look for then? Or, when you ask someone that question, give the answer of your day-to-day or what tools you'll be using, what are the kind of red flags? Is it like you'll be in Tableau all day, or what is it exactly? Yeah.
Well, it really depends. It really depends on what you're looking for, right? I mean, I think that there are some people out there that they want to use Tableau 90% of the time, right? So if they ask that question and someone was like, "You're doing Tableau all day, all night," they're like, "Yes, Tableau, baby." But there are some people that would hate it, right? So it really depends on the person. I will say generally, I think if someone can't give you a straight answer about what the parameters of the role are, what the expectations are, one question I always like to ask is sort of like, what is your vision for success of someone that enters this role, say 6 months or a year from now? Like, how do you see that person growing and developing? And I think too, that also speaks to it, like, when I pursue jobs, I pursue them a little bit differently than I think other people do. I actually tend to look for the company, and then I use the job as an entry point. So I decide what companies I want to work for, and then I find a job that more or less kind of fits in with something I would be willing to do day to day. Because I know, and I've been involved in enough companies to know that once you're in a company, it's a lot easier to move around, to make lateral moves within. As long as you have, like, within the parameters of the skills that people are looking for, it's usually easy to kind of make those connections, and move around. And that's sort of how I've always looked at it. But broadly speaking, I would say if you are in an interview and you ask these questions and someone can't give you a reasonably clear answer, or it feels like it's vague, or it feels like the project, they don't really have an idea of what kind of project they would want to start you on, or they don't have a clear idea of what sort of the growth would look like for you moving on up, or things like that. For me, those would all be red flags. And I would say, okay, it seems like maybe, this company doesn't really know what they're doing, or, I also tend to ask, like, some technical questions too, like, how are you versioning your code, right? How do you do deployments? Like, what does that deployment process look like? How are you metricing? So a big thing, I think, in any type of model you ever build is how you metric it and how you connect that to business value down the road. And how do they do that, right? Because at the end of the day, the survival of your model, or the survival of whatever you do, really, you have to be able to think about how it connects to a dollar sign for most companies down the road. How does this connect value? And like, it's great that I can get a 5% accuracy gain, but if 5% accuracy gain only maps to like a $5 savings, was it worth, putting this data science developer on this project for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, right? So having a clear idea of how some of those numbers break down, also having an idea of what the data is like, what kind of, a data scientist is only going to be as good as the data they have access to. So I would definitely ask questions about, what type of data do you have access to? How are you, how are you leveraging this data? What type of systems do you guys use to sort of store and access data and retrieve data? I think all of those would be really telling for me, because if someone gave me a really clear answer, they're like, look, we're using S3 as a data lake, then we feed this thing into Athena, then we have SageMaker in there, and we can pull and interact with it there, and then we load that off into Redshift. And then, if they can really outline the data pipeline, if they can tell me kind of how they're doing it, and what these code deploy tools, right, to get it out there, and use this for versioning, and this is our process once we have things built, like, how do we do A/B testing? How do we, things like that. There's someone, and it's more of a feel. The truth is, in an interview, this is both sides. It's a feel for me and it's a feel for them. You can kind of tell when you're sitting in an interview and someone's kind of just, they kind of seem like a car salesman, versus someone that you can tell knows what they're talking about, and they understand the complexities of the data science world.
Cool. That helps a lot. Yeah, because I'm worried about like turning up somewhere and they're just like, oh, we need someone because this is the thing, but we don't really know what's going on. So that helps a lot to lay out.
That's a great question, Sonny.
And to a degree too, it's like, it's okay for someone to say, look, like, we're new, we're just starting this machine learning wing for our company, right? We're looking to hire people. We don't exactly know. Maybe they're looking to hire you to kind of help them figure out how to make it work, right? That's okay. The question for me becomes, how are you? And maybe people above you, I'm sure there's someone, if you're new to the field, you're likely entering more like entry mid level kind of thing. So there's someone above you. And the question then becomes, is that person managing expectations for the people above them? Because I think like the path to failure in data science right now is there's a lot of dollar signs that execs are willing to attach to a lot of these projects. And I see a lot of these like AI evangelists going around who are just like, yeah, like deep learning will solve all your problems. You're going to make millions of dollars. Like it'll just do it. And the problem is that these executives believe them. And then when you don't get a model out the door that has a 99% accuracy within 2 months, they assume you're incompetent and then they fire somebody, right? And so at that point, you want to make sure that the people around you and the executives above you, they have reasons for what AI can do, about what machine learning can do, and they have an idea. And they're willing also to kind of give you guys some leeway and some slack to kind of build this out and investigate these things and figure out how it's going to add business value to their product.
Following up on what you just said there, understanding what AI can do. Something that I've been interested by has been what gets talked about in terms of our community and what actually gets done. And my experience has been that the actual modeling effort makes up of like, if you took we took all of our data science folks that are doing the modeling, we took our ML engineers that are doing the deployments of the modeling, we did all the data engineers that are actually supporting and moving stuff around. We took our infra people that are supporting all of them on the underlying pieces. I mean, the modeling makes up like maybe like 5% of like a dedicated AI project. I mean, it feels very small.
Yeah, I mean,
that's my experience. Has that been yours as well?
Yeah, the truth is like, I've been working on this model for at least 2 weeks now. And as I think back to how much time I've really spent on everything, I would say so much of my time has been just data processing and feature engineering. And I still don't think I have it right. And, some of that has been model tuning, but what's amazing is use the tools that are available to you for a lot of this stuff too. Like there are some amazing platforms and frameworks out there that do model selection and tuning and all of this stuff for you. And those are your friend, those are good. Learn how to use those. Like H2O AI has some great tools out there for feature extraction and model selection. And even scikit-learn has some good ones out there too for like grid searching, as well as, they have, I don't know if they really have a formal like model selection API, but like it's easy enough to like do model comparisons through scikit-learn and stuff. And H2O certainly does have some model selection capabilities. And so, knowing those tools, kind of like, I really think it's important to be thinking about how to leverage these tools in ways that are useful. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Always be thinking, this will sound a little bad, but like minimal effort, maximum return, right? And it's funny because I actually see a lot of people, even at Amazon, that seem more like the maximal effort, minimal return kind of people. And it's like, look, this is great, but like, or you could just use this thing over here that's already built and it'll basically do it for you in a day.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think understanding a lot of different technologies, and I think this goes back to just data science being very broad. I think that with data science being so broad, it's really important that people will come to you with questions about architecture, with questions about data infrastructure, with questions about even data security. I've had people come to me and ask me questions about it. And really, you need to have at least some context for the question so that you can advise people. You don't have to be an expert at a certain point. It's really important that you know what you know and you know what you don't know. And you say, look, generally, this is how it's handled. For a question of this type of complexity or this type of importance, you're going to need to reach out to this team or cybersecurity person and get it clear that manage it. But I think really, sorry, it says my internet connection is unstable, so I didn't want to. You guys can still hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Just
again.
thumbs up if you can.
You're a little fuzzy.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. All right, yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, I think that kind of knowing it all and knowing a lot of the tools, and I think too, at the end of the day, machine learning, it's got to be one of the things in your bag of tricks. I think that you need to think of yourself and your career as something where you are flexible, you are multifaceted, you can do a lot of different things. And I think too, people are really looking for that. They want someone that has context about database. They want someone that has context about, data management. They want someone that understands statistics really well. They want someone that can understand, machine learning models, deep learning to a certain degree. They want someone that can do, right, like documentation and reporting. They want someone that can communicate and possibly manage people down the road. So I think it's really important to not become too one-dimensional in this field, because it's easy to slide into that. And I think, keep yourself as versatile as possible. And I think that has helped me in my career. And I definitely, it would be the advice I would give to you. And also don't use a really complicated machine learning model when something really simple will work just as well, right? I think Occam's razor is always a good thing to fall back on here. And I think that if a simple statistical analysis is really all the answer requires, then go with that.
Yeah.
I see people who are, throwing these at these problems, and it's just complete okay. You don't need that much modeling. You don't need that much junk to get what you're trying to do. And a lot of times it obscures the answer, it obscures the transparency and the interpretability of what it can be. And so then you take it to your customers, or you take it to business leaders, and you're not as comfortable with the solution anymore. So it's always important to keep those things in mind.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So kind of coming back around, you were mentioning some of the, Sunny asked a great question about, what should a prospective interviewee be asking during the interview. When you're looking, because, Springboard is obviously taking people with, a huge diversity of backgrounds that are looking to move into this sort of machine learning engineering or direct data science and supportive machine learning sorts of roles. What are some of the things that these people can do to stand out? Because I know, like, one of the concerns that people will often have, coming from a boot camp, will be, will people be willing to hire me? And what do I have to do to take this boot camp experience and make it something valuable? Because we know that there's bias out there against it for sure. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that from like the interviewer side.
Yeah. So in my opinion, and one thing I like about industry is I've never witnessed, I don't feel like I'm at a company or in a field that's super motivated by pedigree. So what I mean by that is they care very much. Either you can do what you say you can do, either you have the skills or you don't. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's funny, my boss, he has a bachelor's in CS, but almost his entire background beyond that was like anthropology and like social science. And he was at the UN for a long time as like a statistician at the UN, and then kind of got into it. And he's brilliant. I love working with him because he's very smart. But he doesn't have the robotics or computer science degree from Stanford that people would probably think of when they think of AI or machine learning. And I think that just is another testament to the fact that, at Amazon, and I think too at Booz Allen, how it really works is, once you get a phone screen, it's really skills oriented. It's really, do you know what you're talking about? Do you say what you can do or don't you? And on your resume, they're going to look through that stuff and they're going to say, oh, okay, this person says they know SQL. Do they really know SQL? Right? Like, we'll ask them some like pretty, baseline questions. And it's also just like in the interview itself. And so I'll kind of backtrack to like how to get to the interview. But in the interview itself, I think it's really more of I think early in my career, I would treat interviews as almost like quizzes. And I learned pretty quickly that that's a really terrible way to do an interview, because you miss out on some really good candidates and you miss out on people's experiences and knowledge in other areas. And so it really has turned into, and I think this is the prevailing wisdom at Amazon too, into more of a conversation with the person. What do you do? What do you know? And yeah, there are some technical questions sprinkled in here and there, just to get a feel for, okay, do you have some technical context for these problems or not? And then other than that, I mean, it really is, it sounds cliche, but it really is true. Usually within like 5 or 10 minutes, I kind of know if it's a yes or a no. And I don't know, I can't tell you how I know, other than just, you can tell, okay, this person is an independent thinker. They're not going to require a lot of hand holding. They may not know everything, but I'm confident that they can teach themselves, and they're not afraid to teach themselves new things. I know that they're going to communicate with me when there are problems. I know that they're going to be good at keeping a level head when things get stressful. You know, it's things like that that can make or break a candidate and can make or break the hiring decision. You know, the technical skills thing, I would say there's like a threshold, but once you are above that bar, it's a lot of other areas. Like at Amazon, for example, it's all about the leadership principles and how does this person mesh with the leadership principles. That's honestly what most of the conversations boil down to.
Okay. Well, I've really monopolized your time here. I feel a little bad about that.
That's okay.
Do any of our students have any sort of questions they'd like to ask Jake about anything that he's doing at Amazon or advice, or it's really an open forum here?
Also, if you don't have the ability to use your microphone, feel free to add them to the chat box below and we can ask them for you. But yeah, great questions so far, guys. And Jacob, thanks for being so transparent with all your answers. I know we really do appreciate that. And it's really good to hear, you know, someone outside of Springboard share their experience as well.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Jacob, this is Abhishek.
Hey,
I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions regarding a problem that I'm working on. I'm not sure you have enough time to talk about that right now. So is there a way I can send you email or?
If you want to try to ask the question now, and I mean, I'm definitely fine with going over in time if everyone else is. If anyone does need to leave, definitely will be respectful of their time. But feel free to ask the question now if you'd like.
Oh, sure. So what I'm working on is a reviews. So basically, I have reviews from the Android apps, and what I'm trying to do is trying to get the information about the product from those reviews, and want to see if I can get what the review is about what feature the review is talking about the product, and what is the sentiment about that product. So what do you think? How should I approach this?
So what have you tried? So a lot of questions in data science boil down to what your data really looks like. And it's difficult for me to exactly throw like a generic answer at it or a context for a model without knowing more. But I will say, what have you tried?
So I haven't tried solving this problem yet, but what I was trying so far was like I have the rating for each review. So just trying to build a classification engine, basically given a review, just train the classifier on the existing database. And so I've used tokenization and the pre-processing of the data, and then used algorithms such as SVM and a single perceptron, things like that.
The first thing I would definitely think about is, so with these online reviews, they've done studies on this, that like a lot of them are really sensitive to how the review question is asked, but also the 5-star rating system is like a terrible rating system. The first thing I would ask you is, what kind of class skew do you have in your data set? Have you looked at class imbalances?
So the data, so I have the data with ratings from 1 to 5, and the ratings are pretty much skewed towards rating 1 and 5. Okay.
So what percentage of your sort of output of your classifications, like what percentage of the data set are these?
So 60% is 1 and 5.
Okay.
And in that 60%, like I would say 40% is 5.
So how are you going about training the model to be like, are you oversampling the minority classes to artificially balance?
I tried undersampling.
Okay. So yeah. You tried oversampling?
You tried undersampling. So
okay. Oh, I see. So you're undersampling the dominant. Got
Yeah,
Okay.
text. So Abby's project is basically, again, looking at those numeric values and just trying to do a classification for the time being. And he's used a number of basically like linear or slightly better than linear classifiers, but hasn't been able to like really get much better than like, I think it was like 57% or something like that, right, Abby?
Yeah.
And so what I thought of as a baseline was like, well, let's look at one of the products. Like, this is something which I didn't get to ask you about, unfortunately. I wish we had like hours to talk, but Amazon has a number of essentially modeling as a service. So I was like, well, as a baseline, it's really useful to be able to compare, like, out of the box, I pay for a solution. What do I get back? And so we found that Amazon Comprehend, or I ran an experiment for it, that you guys were doing like 62%, I think, accuracy on the data set that Abby had. So the things we were thinking about trying, which again, I don't know how much experience you have with this, but like I was thinking like for next steps, like maybe one of the problems would be that the modeling tools that we've used so far, so these, you know, SVMs or other sort of linear S classifiers, are unable to learn the complexity of the data that's being presented to them. So there's, you know, the tokenization we could improve with maybe a different vectorization library, or the model itself we can improve by saying, I'm going to use a more complex model, something that can learn a different sort of problem space. Has that been your experience working on NLP as well?
Yeah, so I haven't done as much on NLP as you have for sure. So Dan sees the NLP guy for sure.
Okay.
But what I will say is my experience is going to be that when you work with these classifiers, class distribution ends up being very important. And so how you undersample or oversample can be important to look at. The other thing is, that's not always the answer. Sometimes the answer is 5 is just more common. And maybe you do want to bias your classifier to predict 5 more often because that's what it sees in the wild more often. And so, artificially manipulating the class distribution has pros and cons. And it's important to really be like judicious when you do it and to really understand the implications of how that's going to impact your classifier if you start playing around with those things. Dan, I definitely agree. I think part of it is going to be that if you're using linear methods, you're only going to get so far with some of these data sets. The next question would be, how are you, constructing your feature vector? And is there a more, like a more clever way that you can think about constructing that feature vector, for example?
Yeah, so like to get to what Jake's saying would be in the NLP world would be, if you tokenize every word, that's one way to do it. You could choose, basically 2-gram tokenization, so 2 word pairs are tokenized as single vectors. You could do a TF-IDF tokenizer where you tokenize every word, but then you give preference to inverse frequency found in the corpus. There's so many different schemes for transforming your data. That's a huge one.
Okay. It would be interesting too to do like these different tokenizers to generate feature vectors for the same
model overall,
right.
And then performance.
And then you can kind of like merge them into a 2-dimensional matrix, right? And this is a harebrained idea, but I'm just going to go with it. And then basically what you have is like a heat map, and then feed that into feed that into basically a deep autoencoder, right? Do the feature extraction there and take that thing and try to train that on probably honestly a boosted tree model or something that's going to be more nonlinear, and see what you get out of that. That would be interesting.
Yeah, autoencoders for exactly what you're talking about, which is the basically similarity mappings, are very popular as well. So
it's
a good novel idea.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read up on that. I haven't tried that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. Well, we do want to be respectful of everyone's time. And Jacob, thanks so much for joining us today. I know, this was a super beneficial session, and I know we all really appreciate it. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks so much for listening in today. I know some of us, like Sunny and Luis, who've been here for the last couple of weeks, are excited to see more students join in on the call. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. If you have any other questions regarding the course or curriculum, feel free to email me at molly@springboard.com. I'll add it to the chat box now. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next week. We'll have a regular Q&A from there. But then hopefully going forward, we'll have more awesome guests like Jacob. And stay tuned, and we'll definitely be posting in the communities. But other than that, Jacob, thanks again for coming. Dan, thanks as always. And everyone else, have a great rest of your night. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah,
No problem. Thanks, guys.
All right, see you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.